My. Welcome. It's me, it's Alvin Squad Shalupi. What can I say, ladies and gentlemen? The NBA 2022-2023 season was a season of absolute chaos, controversy, and uncertainty. I have to say that this is probably the most unique NBA season that I've seen personally so far. And there was a lot going on as far as storylines. There was a lot of things that was just absolutely unexpected that happened. And best of all, from a basketball fan perspective, I would say that it was pretty great because there was a lot of options as to what team could potentially win the championship. There wasn't like back when we had the super teams and we could pretty much predict who was going to go to the finals and who was going to win the championship before it even happened. That was not something that occurred in this NBA season whatsoever. Now we had favorites, of course. We had favorites and teams that we anticipated would, at least contend to make a championship run and potentially make it to the NBA finals. But we did not know for sure at any point in time. Okay. And so when I think of the teams that were expected probably at the beginning of the season, preseason time, obviously the Golden State Warriors had just won the championship the previous season, right? So with them not pretty much having the same exact roster, we expected that they would be one of the teams that we could say, hey, they may end up going back to the finals or at least contending for it. But another team that we thought about potentially in the West would be the Denver Nuggets. Another team would be potentially the Phoenix Suns, the Dallas Mavericks, the Los Angeles Lakers, the Los Angeles Clippers. Those were the teams that I think most people on paper would say, we may be able to see these guys make it back or make it potentially to the finals or make a nice run to the championship. But who would have thought that things will play out so much more differently later on? But we'll get to that. And then in the East, you obviously have the Celtics, who were just in the finals but got destroyed by the Warriors. You have the Celtics, you have the 76ers, because at this point they have underachieved and they need to do more. You also have the Nets, who also have underachieved and they need to do more. And so those are some of the teams that we were thinking of, right? And even though the Miami Heat were just basically one shot away from going to the NBA Finals, I'm not necessarily sure that people were expecting them to make a finals run based on the roster that they had. But it was something that you can keep in the back of your mind. Okay? Obviously, the Milwaukee Bucks, another team that you could say, hey, they may end up making it to the finals as well. So it was pretty interesting to see all of that. Now, when we go back to the Warriors, I think this is where we start the controversy of the preseason. Okay. Now, there's a situation in a Warriors practice in which Draymond Green ended up getting into a scuffle with Jordan Poole. That scuffle ended with Draymond Green absolutely punching Jordan Poole in the face. You know what I'm saying? A nice knockout, if you will. And it was unfortunate to see. And when that situation happened, one of the things that I thought to myself was, wow, I wonder how this will affect that team in their chemistry the rest of this season. Okay? Bookmark that and think about that. Obviously, if you know, you know. But nonetheless, that was something that I thought at the beginning of the season, oh, yeah, this could really change things forever. On the side of the Brooklyn Nets, you have both Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, asking and talking about trades. Now, this was after Kyrie had already opted into his contract with the Nets, with the intention that he may end up doing something. But within the contract itself, it also allowed him to walk if needed after the season is over. And he had made some news about wanting to be traded at some point in time as well. And so with all of this uncertainty in that locker room around June 20th, 2022, right, in the offseason, Kevin Durant ended up asking to be traded himself.
paparazzi. Kevin Durant's manager, Rich Kleiman, has told him that Kevin Durant has requested a trade from the Brooklyn Nets. And so I would like to bring in the man, the myth, the legend, Stephen A. Smith. What is your reaction to this?
I'm pleasantly surprised. I think that it's the right move for Kevin Durant to make because being paired with Kyrie Irving has been nothing short of a migraine, and it got to a point where he had to make a move because in the end, Kevin Durant was looking very, very bad. The fact of the matter is he followed Kyrie Irving to Brooklyn. He accepted a coach with zero experience coaching because that's what Kyrie wanted to do. Kevin Durant wants to go to the Phoenix Suns. I know he's got a home in Miami. I know that the Miami Heat are an option, but they'd have to virtually gut their team in order to acquire him.
And with him asking for that trade, you didn't know what was going to happen. Now, as Stephen A. Smith had alluded to there, he had mentioned that some of the teams that he may want to go to or are looking to go to would be the Phoenix Suns and the Miami Heat. Okay? And as we all know, he ended up ultimately going to the Phoenix Suns, but it's just crazy to think that that was something that happened there. And this is a whole separate topic for sure, but I do want you all to know that the era that the Brooklyn Nets had between Kevin Durant and Kyrie and then, James Harden has to be the most botched opportunity for a super team that I've ever seen at any point in time. Absolutely botched. The fact that they played together that long without really playing together that much because of injury, because of personal reasons, things of that nature. It's crazy to think that a team with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, first of all, was only able to win one playoff series, and then when they had James Harden, they weren't able to do anything beyond that. And that was a 4-year span, 3 to 4 year span, and it resulted in nothing. Absolutely disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. Then you get into some other things that happen in the offseason, like, for example, on Twitter, people found out that Doc Rivers is a very nasty freak. For some reason, he was just, his likes were under question. And people were investigating that because they just noticed that for some reason he had a lot of freaky stuff in his likes on Twitter. And unfortunately for people on Twitter, you can see people's likes. You can see all of that stuff, right? Now, at that time, what you would want to do is bookmark, but I believe recently they've also changed that as well. So you got that stuff going on. Obviously, we heard about what happened with Ime Udoka, right? After the finals, gotten into the whole situation or the situationship that he had with an employee within the Boston Celtics organization, a young lady there, for whatever reason deciding to do that and perform adultery, cheating on Nia Long, which is kind of crazy, but it is what it is, I suppose. Very unfortunate. But like I said, just absolute chaos, controversy, and uncertainty. So we have all of these things happen and the season hasn't even started yet. Okay? Now, once we get to the actual season itself, we have to think about the teams that I mentioned before that potentially could end up being, title contenders. You also have up and coming teams that may be able to do some things on their own. Jalen Brunson obviously ended up signing with the Knicks. He did not stay with the Mavs because the Mavs were not trying to pay him what he thought he was owed. So he's on the Knicks, and New York natives were very interested to seeing what exactly he would do as a member of the New York Knicks. And, you had other teams like the Minnesota Timberwolves that are still looking to do some things. Sacramento Kings are starting to make some moves. And once we get to that point, you're going to see that they actually ended up doing a lot better than people probably anticipated in the beginning of the season, because you realize I ain't saying anything about them starting out. So definitely a great job by them. And so, yeah, that pretty much covers the preseason. And so we'll go ahead and get to the actual NBA season and go over the chaos that happened there. So let's talk about the actual NBA season, right? So we have all of these things that I mentioned previously in the preseason portion of the video, but now we get to the point where the actual NBA season starts. And so a lot of the teams start off pretty much the way that we expect them to. However, one of the main things that was immediately highlighted was the fact that the Lakers were starting off 2-10. Okay, now the Lakers had a pretty rough start, despite the fact that they had, again, Russell, Anthony Davis, and LeBron James. And so a lot of the things that people called into question was, would the Lakers finally decide to make some sort of move during the season to potentially try to salvage whatever they have and then make a title run deep into the playoffs. Now, a lot of people figured that no matter what the Lakers did, especially depending on when they actually do it, if it's not right away, it may be too late for the Lakers to actually be able to, make it towards the playoffs and do anything of significance in the playoffs itself. Okay, and it was actually pretty interesting because, if I'm not mistaken, around the time where it was getting close, right before they actually triggered the trade itself, Vegas had the Lakers' odds of winning a championship at like 1%, 2%, something crazy like that. But fortunately for them, that is not how things turned out, or at least the season wasn't as bleak as we had originally thought it was going to be, despite the fact that they did start off 2-10. Okay, now what I want to do is, you could tell, because at some point LeBron James already made it pretty clear that he had no intentions of just playing basketball for fun anymore. It's like he wants to play with some sort of chance of winning a title every single year. And I mean, he's 38 years old, right? He's 38. Obviously at this point he's still doing things to add to his resume to make him one of the greatest players of all time. Obviously, I consider him to be the second greatest player of all time, right behind Michael Jordan. And even if you want to debate that and say that LeBron is the greatest at this point, I would disagree. But obviously, there is somewhat of an argument, if you will. But no matter what, I would say that between Michael Jordan and LeBron James, and this is a whole other topic, but to me, at this point in time, and probably for a long time, when you talk about who are the greatest players of all time, there should be no reason why that LeBron James and Michael Jordan are not the first two names that pop up, not in that order, because like I said, it's Jordan, LeBron for me, right? But there's no reason why you should ever name anyone else aside from those two whenever you say this player is the greatest player in NBA history. There's no reason why. There's no reason whatsoever, okay? And so with that being said, because they've managed to really put themselves ahead of the pack in comparison to everyone else, okay? But that's not important right now. Now, again, one of the things within this season that was important was the fact that LeBron James was very, very close. Now, at this point, he was going to obviously pass Kareem Abdul-Jabbar as the all-time leading scorer in NBA history. He's going to have the all-time points. And so that was one of the main highlights of the season itself, because obviously that is a milestone that a lot of people did not think that they would be alive to see, right? And so it's obviously very impressive, especially considering the fact that at no point in time did anyone ever consider LeBron James to be a scorer type player. He's always been more of a playmaker that just happens to know how to score, okay? Especially the way that he does. So that's always been one of the biggest plus or positives for LeBron James' legacy. Now, like I said before, you get to a point where the Lakers are looking pretty rough, okay? And Russell Westbrook says at some point in time, and it was actually kind of funny, they went into this, I think it was like a 4-game winning streak at some point, and when they got on that 4-game winning streak, Darvin Ham was starting to feel a lot more confidence. They obviously had him as the new coach for the Los Angeles Lakers after they got rid of Frank Vogel, and so Darvin Ham comes in. He's very excited to see that they're actually getting things on track. And, they're trying to have this inspirational speech. And then Russell comes out of nowhere and pretty much says, hey, let's just all have fun. Don't worry about anything else. And it's like, to LeBron, a guy like him, he's not really looking to hear something like that, because he don't want to just only have fun. He's, like he said before, he's trying to play this seriously. And so even in this clip here, you'll see he's looking at Russell, and it's like, whoa, we talking about, buddy?
What's wrong what we can be? And we just got to keep stacking, keep building, keep doing things the right way. Being together, being competitive. being aggressive.
Let's
Let's
get
keep this going.
Let's get greedy.
Let's get real greedy, man. Let's get real greedy.
Let's get greedy, man.
We got on
Come on, man.
Keep having fun, bro.
Yes, sir.
You happy for the next man? Keep having fun, bro.
Yes,
Win,
sir.
lose, or draw, have fun. Just keep having fun, bro. Come on, man.
And no three, man. 1, 2, 3, man.
So I thought that was pretty funny. Okay. And so at some point in time, right around All-Star break, you know, we get to the All-Star game and they end up making that trade. They end up making the trade, getting Westbrook out of there, getting Patrick Beverley out of there. Russell ends up going to the Clippers and some other pieces are moved. Patrick Beverley is obviously sent to the Bulls. And so they end up getting that trade that they were looking for right around the time of All-Star break. And so once the All-Star break ends, now the Lakers can ultimately focus on trying to make the playoffs. The thing is that in the midst of all of that, that means that their playoff run basically starts at that point in time. And so that's one of the things that was kind of dangerous, you know, in relation to how far the Lakers could go without feeling gas, you know, trying to sustain that, because prior to the All-Star break, LeBron James and Anthony Davis, they were in and out of the lineup because of injuries, okay, and lower management, whereas Russell was playing the entire time, and so he was still catching a lot of the slack for any time things were not looking good for the Lakers itself. Now, also in the West, we had, at this point in time, the Golden State Warriors not playing as well as they should have, right? Because the Golden State Warriors, somehow, some way, they gotten to the point where, for some reason, throughout the season, they can barely win on the road. They win games at home, but most of the time, if they're playing a road game, more than likely they lose. And so that was one thing that I thought was going to be indicative of how their playoff run would be, because if you can't really win games on the road, then ultimately you can't do much as far as winning a championship goes. Correct. And so that was something that I thought was also interesting within the season itself. Okay, now we get to the point where Kyrie Irving actually gets his trade. So again, like I mentioned in the preseason section, Kyrie Irving was kind of flip-floppy, wishy-washy in regards to signing his extension with the Nets. He said he wasn't going to do it, then he ended up doing it anyway, because ultimately, what teams are really trying to sign a person like Kyrie Irving at this point in his career? You know, a lot of his career has been extended at this point just off of the back of him arguably making the greatest clutch shot in playoff history, right? And he hasn't done anything since then. He's wildest in the regular season. You know, he's still one of, if not the most skilled basketball player ever. He's probably the best ball handler ever, if not one of the best. And so those things makes him a box office player. The only problem is that a lot of times is he's not available, either if it's because of injury or because of controversy or because of his own personal motive, right? And so you get to this point in the season where he's missing a lot of games because of something that he posted on his Twitter or his Instagram, I believe. And this was pretty much for the NBA, something that they found to be or deemed to be inappropriate, as it was something that was not in favor to the Jewish community. And so they ultimately ended up suspending him for games for that. And he ended up missing games because of these comments that he ended up basically promoting by retweeting it on his Twitter timeline. Not necessarily saying that he believes in it according to him or anything like that, or he agrees with it, but the fact was that it was something that he decided to promote to his followers by deciding to retweet it. And so he ended up getting suspended for that. On top of that, Steve Nash, who was a first-year head coach after, you know, they had already, you know, said that that's what they wanted once Kyrie and KD joined the team. You know, Steve Nash's first time coaching in the NBA, and this is something that Kyrie ultimately wanted, and this is something that he had to have Kevin Durant agree with as well. But unfortunately, they end up firing Steve Nash after both him and Kyrie pretty much publicized their disdain towards having Steve Nash still be the coach. And so he ends up getting fired, and he gets fired, and then later down the line, Kyrie Irving ends up getting traded anyway. So now we have this Kyrie Irving trade to the Dallas Mavericks, in which the Dallas Mavericks do not get a lot, and they get Kyrie Irving back, and it's basically Kyrie Irving on a rental. You don't know if he's going to be there after this season ends. And so, when Kyrie Irving actually got traded to the Dallas Mavericks, they were at the 5th or 6th seed in the West. And so it was pretty interesting to see just how much they faltered after Kyrie Irving ended up joining the team, which is crazy. Then you have the Kevin Durant trade as well. So Kyrie Irving goes first, he goes to Dallas, and then eventually Kevin Durant, he says again, hey, I want to be traded. After things seemed like it was going to be a-okay, because the Nets actually looked good at first. Right before Kyrie Irving got suspended, they were looking good. They were looking like they may be able to do something this year with just those two as a duo. And then, you have your role players and your backup. But Kyrie Irving gets traded, and then we get Kevin Durant. Now he gets traded as well. Okay, so with this trade, he ends up going to the Phoenix Suns. So he ends up getting what he wanted. Right, that was one of the teams that he mentioned that he wanted to be on, and he ends up getting that. And so that works out for him greatly. Now, at this point, the Nets get some players back, but there's not much going on. With all of that being said, we have some great things that's going on. The NBA MVP race was pretty much between Luka, Jason Tatum, Joel Embiid, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Nikola Jokic throughout the entirety of the year. At some point in time, more so towards the mid-season area, I think the first two names, Luka and Jason, at that point no one really considered them to be even MVP candidates as strongly as the last three. So pretty much the entire season it was kind of flip-floppy between Nikola, Giannis, and Embiid. And so remember, this is a regular season award, okay? So many people thought at first it was probably Jokic because he was averaging the numbers that he was averaging, which is close to a triple-double like he normally does. But the main gripe against him was that he's obviously a one-way player, basically, right? You don't really associate defense with Nikola Jokic whatsoever. But his offensive prowess in this case, because of his ability to score, and then obviously he gets his rebounds, and obviously he runs the show in Denver, right? He's averaging 10 assists basically a game as a center. You don't see stuff like that at all from centers. The last center to do things like that, or even close to that, was Nikola himself and Wilt Chamberlain. So with that being said, that was one of the primary reasons why he was in the MVP talks throughout the entire year, on top of the fact that they had number one in the West for basically the entire year, on top of the fact that he was playing all of his games. He wasn't missing games whatsoever. And so when you look at Giannis and Embiid, the two things, or the main thing that you could say about them, was that they were not available for a lot of games, or for some games. Nikola was playing each and every single game. They were not. They were missing games because of injuries, and that's just how things go, right? But the thing is that when Giannis was playing, right, he was playing a lot of the time throughout that season without his second best player, as we would mostly all agree to be, is Chris Middleton. Throughout most of the season, he was not available to play whatsoever. So not only was Giannis able to keep the Bucks afloat and have them with the number one seed in the East, or number two seed in the East, but mainly the number one seed in the East, Chris Middleton's not there. He's a two-way player, so he's averaging these dominant numbers while also being basically the defender anchorman of the Milwaukee Bucks at the same time. And then you have Joel Embiid also doing the same exact thing. He's averaging, 20 plus points and 10 rebounds a game. He's also averaging a certain amount of blocks, doing pretty well throughout the entire season. He does this being a two-way player, asserting his dominance, and really keeping the Philadelphia 76ers afloat as a strong title contender in the East. And so throughout the season, you had those three names pop up over and over again. Everyone's going back and forth between the three to ultimately decide, hey, who should be the NBA MVP. And so when we get towards the playoffs, you end up finding out, that we ultimately decide that Joel Embiid is going to be the regular season MVP. He also is the scoring champion, as he managed to average about 33.1 points per game, okay, which is his second year in a row winning the scoring title, by the way. But he averaged 33.1 points a game, 10.2 rebounds, and 4.2 assists per game for this regular season. And so they end up crowning him the MVP of the NBA regular season. And when you look at the other numbers from the other two guys to finish the season, you can also say that they could have won as well. Jokic could have easily won. He ended up being runner-up, and Giannis could have won as well. And you know, it's interesting because throughout the season, as I mentioned before, one of the things that popped up was that Nikola Jokic was probably not going to win MVP simply because of voters fatigue, which is something that we've seen on multiple occasions. You know, when guys win over and over again, you just don't want to keep seeing them win that over and over again. So that could have been the same thing for Giannis. You know, he won back-to-back MVP, but then didn't win the third one. That ended up going to Jokic. And then obviously Jokic just won back-to-back. He ended up not winning the third, etc., etc. There's been multiple years that LeBron could have won. There were multiple years that Michael Jordan could end up winning, but they ended up not winning at all. And so, you know, voters fatigue for MVP is something that happens quite a bit. So if we look at Giannis's stats as well from this season, for the 2022-2023 NBA season, he played 63 games and averaged 31.1 points per game, shooting 55% from the field, 11.8 rebounds, 5.7 assists, right? So very impressive numbers. Again, definitely could have won potentially. And then if we look at Nikola Jokic's stats from this season, he averaged 24.5 points per game, shooting 63% from the field, 11.8 rebounds, and 9.8 assists per game. So almost basically averaged a triple-double in the regular season. So again, very impressive numbers, very impressive. Could have went either way. Some people was trying to attribute it to a race thing if Nikola ended up winning again instead of Embiid or Giannis. But ultimately it ended up going to Embiid. A lot of people felt like he was deserving of that title. Again, it is a regular season MVP award, right? It is a regular season award. It's not in association to the playoffs whatsoever. But once we do get to the playoffs, a lot of people end up protesting or saying, hey, obviously we gave the award to the wrong guy. And so that was unfortunate for Joel Embiid to be associated with. We get to the NBA playoffs, and you know, a lot of teams end up where they were for the most part. I think one of the main interesting things was that the Miami Heat actually ended up being right outside of the playoffs and actually had to participate in a play-in, and they ended up playing the Atlanta Hawks, in which they lost that game. Then they had to play the Chicago Bulls and ended up winning that game. Okay, so on the side of the West with the play-in tournament, we had the Lakers that ended up playing the Timberwolves. The Lakers ended up winning that game, in which that allowed them to get their spot right away. And then the Bulls played the Raptors. The Bulls won that. Then the Bulls had to play the Heat. The Heat ended up winning that, as I mentioned. And then once the Timberwolves lost, they had to wait to play the Thunder or the Pelicans. And the Thunder ended up beating the Pelicans. So then the Thunder ended up playing against the Timberwolves. And then the Timberwolves ended up winning that ultimately. And so at that point, we had everything as a lock for the NBA playoffs, in which we have on the East, number 1 seed Milwaukee playing against number 8 seed Miami Heat. Then you have the number 4 seed Cleveland Cavaliers playing against the number 5 seed New York Knicks. We have the number 3 seed Philadelphia 76ers playing against the Brooklyn Nets, who was the number 6 seed. We have the number 2 seed Boston Celtics playing against the Atlanta Hawks, who is the number 7 seed. And then on the West, we have the number 1 seed Denver Nuggets playing against the Minnesota Timberwolves that are number 8 seed. We have the Phoenix Suns playing the Los Angeles Clippers, right, number 4 and 5 seeds, which also gives us the Kevin Durant versus Russell Westbrook storyline if you care about that. And it would have been nice if Kawhi and Paul George was healthy for that, but unfortunately Paul George was not, and Kawhi only played, well, we'll get to that. And then we have the Sacramento Kings, who were the number 3 seed, playing pretty fantastic that regular season, by the way. They ended up finishing as a 3rd seed, very impressive, and they managed to go against the Golden State Warriors, who, like the Lakers, also had to really ramp things up after the All-Star break in order to make it to the playoffs because of those road wins that they were struggling with the entire season. So that was also very interesting. And then finally you had the Memphis Grizzlies, who, despite missing Ja Morant, or Ja Wick as some people call it, throughout the season because of a video of him being out flashing his gun on Instagram. He missed a lot of games because of that. They end up still winning games despite his absence. So they end up with the number 2 seed, and they play against the Los Angeles Lakers, who were the 4 seed. And so at that point, we are getting to the playoffs, and we have some pretty nice storylines from the playoffs as well. And that's going to be our next section. It is probably easiest if we start the playoff talk with the pretty clear-cut matchups, to me at least. I think most people would agree that we expected the 76ers to get rid of the Nets, which they did end up doing in a sweep. Then the Nuggets beating the Timberwolves in 5 was pretty much expected. The Suns beating the Clippers was expected due to PG being out and injured, but it happened in 5 because Kawhi also ended up getting injured after the second game due to a right knee injury. He ended up not playing again in that series whatsoever. Now, I have to admit that I thought the Miami/Bucks series was going to be another no-brainer, but boy, was I wrong. The Heat ended up winning in 5 games, okay? And people said that Jimmy Butler was Hemi Butler, Michael Jordan's long-lost son, all types of things. And he had completely dominant numbers, you know what I'm saying, which included a 56-point game in Game 4. Albeit Giannis was injured and missed games 2 and 3, but he tried to come back and play through his injury, but it was already too late. And the Heat's momentum just soared them past the Bucks, as well as the Bucks' own questionable decisions and lack of great effort. Jimmy just could not be stopped, as he averaged 37.6 points per game, 6 rebounds per game, and about 4 assists per game on about 60% shooting. So it was just too much. Now, unfortunately for the Heat, Tyler Hero broke his shooting hand early on as well. And so this cost him from appearing the rest of the playoffs. That series was definitely a shocker to most people, or at least I believe. After that, pretty much everything else was standard in the East, okay? The Celtics beat the Hawks. And even though it was in 6 games, no one really expected the Hawks to win that series. And the Knicks-Cavs was done in 5 games, oddly enough. But neither team would make it past the next matchup, so no one really cared too much about which team won that first matchup, aside from the diehard fans of each particular team. Now we get to the rest of the West. The Grizzlies-Lakers was interesting because Dylan Brooks decided to have some choice words about LeBron, calling him old and saying he wanted to poke the bear. Unfortunately, that backfired because the Lakers eliminated them in 6. Including LeBron actually driving at Dylan Brooks to score a late game basket against Dylan in overtime of Game 3 in a 40-point blowout in Game 6. People ended up noticing a weird pattern with AD, despite the talent he is supposed to be, but for some reason he would have good games the first game, then the second game something mediocre, and then they'll just kind of go back and forth, up and down like that the entire time, and pretty much the entirety of the playoffs. So it's very, very strange thing to see. Okay. Now, with that being said, the Grizzlies end up getting eliminated. Obviously, Ja, earlier this season, he has said that they'd be fine in the West.
Who do you look at around the league as you're studying and say, we're going to have to run through them?
Celtics.
No one in the West.
Nah, I'm fine in the West.
That ultimately proved to be a lie. And so they get bounced out and head home to Cancun or wherever else right away. Then finally the Warriors managed to come back. You know what I'm saying? The Warriors are playing against the Sacramento Kings. And so the Warriors, to some people's surprise, they end up losing the first 2 games. Okay. But they come back from the 2-0. And that series is kind of a back and forth the entire time, with the Kings managing to force a Game 7 after the Warriors decided to not finish everything off in Game 6. All right. Once they got to Game 7, the Warriors did ultimately win. And Steph, as we've seen before, ended up putting up phenomenal numbers and willing his team to victory. And so we move on to the next round. At this point, we get the Miami versus New York Knicks matchup, which, based on the previous round, was there really anyone that thought that the Heat were going to lose this series? No, shouldn't. Now, when Jimmy got hurt with the ankle injury, maybe someone could have gotten nervous and thought things would change. But they still won with him playing as a decoy, so there was no concern. The next matchup was the LA Lakers versus the Golden State Warriors, and based on the fact that the Warriors struggled against the Kings, it didn't appear that they would be able to really beat the Lakers, with AD being the biggest factor, the biggest mismatch for the Warriors. That series was interesting for a while. What made it more interesting was the fact that they lost in 6 games, okay? A lot of people felt like Steph Curry was out there by himself. Jordan Poole and Klay played really bad that series, okay? Klay shot poorly, but still at least averaged about 16 points per game. But he shot a dismal 34% from the field goal and 38% from 3. And it's just something that you wouldn't expect from someone that is, considered one of the top 5 greatest shooters ever in NBA history. There was even a point in the series where LeBron James had left him wide open for 3 on purpose just so he could triple team or double team Steph Curry. And Klay missed it, clanked that. And Jordan, however, was just awful. There's really no other way to call it. Even with the baddies in the gym, they always talk about baddies or menace Jordan, right? Where the baddies Jordan Poole. Even when they were in attendance for some games, he averaged only 8.3 points per game on 34% shooting from the field and 25% from 3. It's absolutely awful. And so, as of the time of this video, Dre's decided to decline his player option and become a free agent. Nothing's happened with him yet, and Jordan Poole has actually been dealt to the Wizards. Okay, so that's what's going on with them for the offseason. We move on, and the Nuggets continue their dominance after yet another Chris Paul injury, because Chris Paul just cannot seem to escape these curses. They end up beating the Suns in 6 games. Now, this series was pretty clear from the get-go that the Nuggets are going to win this. For the most part, Devin Booker was the main one that was doing a lot of the heavy work. And Durant was not really scoring as efficiently as he's known to be. It was pretty inefficient. So, very unfortunate. Now, game 6, the Suns got blown out by like 40 points or 30 points again. Okay. And so that ended up getting Monty Williams fired and taken off of that team. As of the time of this video, we have hired Monty Williams as the head coach of the Detroit Pistons, my Pistons. And so we'll see how things play out there. It seems that we are invested in him for a long period of time at the very least. But like I said, Durant struggled to average 30. He shot in an unusual 45% from the field and 22% from 3. And Booker managed to score about 30 points per game on 50% shooting from both the field and the 3-point line. So it was pretty impressive, but it was not enough. They were top heavy. They had no help whatsoever. And so they ultimately ended up losing. Now, we get to the Philly versus Boston series. Okay, this is an interesting one. Now, 76ers started great with them winning a game without Embiid. Harden looked like his former self and dropped 45 points. Things appeared normal when the Celtics won game 2 pretty easily. Then Embiid returned in game 3, but the Celtics still won. We had a game 4 end in overtime with the 76ers winning by a point. And Philly followed that up with another win, and suddenly it seemed like we were on the verge of, having that series end in 6. Now, when game 6 comes around, Jason Tatum has the worst game of his life, or at least that I've witnessed, especially in the playoffs, that I could think of. He ended halftime with only a single point, and by the end of the third, he only had 3 points total. This game was on a silver platter for the 76ers to take, but for some reason they decided to play around. They didn't go in for the elimination. Both Harden and Embiid struggled. Embiid scored an exhausting 26 points with 10 rebounds. And it was just, I don't know. But Harden had 13 points on 16 shots and passed up a lot of what looked like easy layups to 3-point shooters just for them to miss most of the time. Some people are actually convinced that James Harden played pretty poorly on purpose in order to sabotage Doc and get him fired out of Philly, which is kind of an interesting thing to say, so we'll see. But Jason scored 16 in the fourth quarter and led the Celtics to victory. And so at that point, to me, the 76ers were done. I knew it, and, that is what happened. The Celtics ended up winning in 7. We move on to the West/Eastern Conference Finals, and we can start with the Lakers Nuggets because at this point it was clear that no one in the West was going to beat the Nuggets. So as pretty much everyone expected, the Nuggets advanced early. They got a sweep against the Lakers, but all the games were competitive, I will say. On the other side, however, the Heat and Celtics series was crazy. Now, the Heat started off hotter than anyone expected and absolutely bombarded the Celtics, taking 3 games in a row. People got pretty nervous pretty quick, but the Celtics managed to fight back, not allowing themselves to get swept. They won games 4 and 5, and throughout the series so far, it was becoming more and more apparent that playoff Jimmy was no longer a thing. Even though he did have that ankle injury, he was just not able to dominate a game the same way he did in round 1 against the Bucks. Bam held his own, and the help that he got from guys like Gabe Vincent or mainly Caleb Martin, Max Strus, really helped them keep afloat. But Game 6 was very interesting. Jimmy had another rough game until the 4th quarter when it looked like the Celtics would take the game and force Game 7 pretty easily. However, Jimmy caught fire, making timely baskets and free throws. He even somehow got fouled on a 3-point attempt, making all the free throws. They were up 1, and at this point, the Celtics had to pretty much beg for something crazy to happen, a nice shot off an inbound, in order to win that game. Marcus Smart takes a shot and misses, but no one boxes out and no one grabs the rebound, and so Derek White is ultimately able to get a nice putback and win the game and force that Game 7. Once we got to Game 7, sadly for the Boston fans, that game is basically over after the very first play because Jason ended up ruining his ankle. Once that happens, he tries to play the game and tries to play decoy and try to score and help as much as he can, but with him wobbling the entire time, it was pretty clear that he was not going to be able to do anything as well as he'll want to. And so at that point, it should have been up to Jaylen Brown to pick up the slack, but he didn't do that. He ended with 19 points on 34% shooting, and he also ended up having 8 turnovers within that game, which is absolutely god-awful, okay? And so at this point now, Jaylen Brown, now he has 1 year to win 5 titles that he said he'll win while being interviewed by Taylor Rooks. By the way, special shout out to Caleb Martin in this series because he averaged about 19 points per game on 60% shooting, had some pretty pivotal games. Even if they did end up in a loss, some of those games would have been a lot uglier had he not played as well as he did. So shooting 60% from the field, 49% from the 3, he made a big difference each game. So now we move on to the NBA Finals. Okay. Admittedly, at this point, it should have been pretty clear to most, if not everyone, that Denver was not losing. And so it was hard for me to imagine that the series would go beyond 5 games. I predicted that the Nuggets would win in 5. And, if the Heat managed to get 2 crazy games, then they can force it to 6. But that was about it. And so the thing is that the Heat had been on an impressive run, and they won series that people really didn't think that they would have won in the first place. So the Bucks series and then obviously the Celtics series, those series most people picked the Heat to be the underdog in the situation, so they ended up winning. So definitely great for them. They proved everyone wrong again and again and again. It seemed like the only person that really knew that this was going to go the way it was Jimmy Butler, because if you remember from last year's playoffs, when the Heat were pretty close to making it to the NBA Finals, he predicted that they would make it back to the finals. They would make it back to the Eastern Conference Finals. He put in the same exact situation.
Next year, we will have enough, and we're going to be right back in the same situation, and we're going to get it done.
And he was absolutely right. But sadly, in the NBA Finals here this year, it was just tragic. It was just tragic. In this series here, there was just not much that Miami could do about the duo of Jokic and Murray. It was just way too powerful. And even when they had games where they were not at the top of the game, the role players would step up. They had a pretty historical Game 3 in which they both had 30-point triple doubles, but there was other games where they didn't really do as much. Noticeably in Game 4, Jamal Murray didn't really play that well, and Jokic managed to squeeze out 20 points, but it was kind of like a quiet 20 and 10. He didn't really have as many assists as well. But the crazy thing is that Aaron Gordon ends up scoring 27 points, shooting on 73% shooting, and he even made 3 out of 4 threes. And Bruce Brown kind of closed out that game with 21 points himself, in which he didn't have that many points at all in the first half, but within that fourth quarter scored quite a bunch of points, and they ended up winning that game. And so at this point, the Heat were really down bad, and by game 5 it was already too late. The entire Heat team did not play that well, and the Nuggets didn't really have a strong game that game 5. But the way how the game was waning down and getting towards more and more towards the conclusion, Jimmy tried to do what he could to muster up some sort of heroic run, and unfortunately simple mistakes and misses concluded the series. And so that was basically it. Our NBA champions for 2023 season ended up being the Denver Nuggets, with Jokic being named the Finals MVP and mainly being recognized as the best player in the NBA by most people in the media and just in the real world after his impressive and mostly consistent run in the playoffs. Not every day you see someone average about 30 points per game with 13.5 rebounds per game and, basically 9.5, 10 assists per game. Essentially just averaging a triple-double throughout the whole postseason run. So it's not even just a series. This is throughout the entirety of the playoffs. He's averaging a triple-double, basically, while shooting 55% from the field and 46% from 3. So very impressive numbers and very deserved trophy there. And so the Joker performed above all others and deservingly won his first ring and Finals MVP. Now, what I did not mention is that towards the latter end of the playoffs, we had some things going on, such as Ja deciding to play with a gun on Instagram Live yet again. After he was eliminated, and then that was during the finals. Adam Silver has said that he didn't really want to discuss what Ja's punishment is until after the finals is over in regards to that, but he ultimately ended up getting suspended for 25 games for this upcoming season, which is unfortunate for the Grizzlies. And then we had another interesting story pop up in which Zion Williamson apparently was dealing with a former adult star named Mariah Mills that is highly upset, I guess, at him for getting another girl pregnant who was also some sort of cam girl or something while they were together. Now, when I say together, it's not like an actual formal relationship, but Zion would pay a monthly allowance to Mariah basically to be his personal escort. And they may have talked about doing some things and settling down after that, but she posted so many tweets and so many receipts of Zion sending her $20,000, $25,000 multiple times within the same month, multiple times this year in order for her to be with him. And he even made it clear that he wanted to potentially pay for her to move to New Orleans because that's what he really wanted. And so Zion's put himself in a very rough spot, very unfortunate, and you hate to see it. But Mariah ended up tweeting about Zion for basically a week straight and then threatened to release an adult tape until she suddenly got suspended on Twitter. And then she popped back up again with a tattoo of Zion's name on her face. So no one really knows what's happening there in that situation. But in other news, Marcus Smart has officially been traded to the Grizzlies. Kristaps Porzingis is a Celtic. Bradley Beal is a Sun. And like I mentioned earlier, Jordan Poole's on the Wizards. CP3, or CP0 for some people, is a Warrior. And so it's going to be interesting to see how all of these moves play out. The draft is also concluded at the time of this video. And so Victor has ended up being drafted by the Spurs, #1 overall. And y'all know me, I don't really follow much college basketball whatsoever. So a lot of the prospects and how good they are and things like that, it's kind of ghost information for me. I don't really go off of anything until I see it in the actual NBA season. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the draft class does because I've heard so many positive things about multiple players, including the Pistons' 5th pick, Ausar Thompson. So we shall see how exactly that all plays out. But ultimately, that covers the NBA 2022-2023 season. Absolutely wild from start to finish. let's see how things shape up in the future. Leave a like if you did enjoy this video. I know this video is fairly different from anything I've ever posted on this channel or my other channel. This is basically a video essay. I just wanted to pretty much give my perspective of how I felt about the NBA season this year, because again, one of the most, if not the most, actually this was the most unique season that I've seen personally that I can remember in my lifetime. That's why I decided to make a video like this to kind of recap everything that went on in the season, the important things, and just go over a lot of the facts and provide my insight on the season itself. So it was absolutely a phenomenal season overall, and I'm glad that I was able to watch and spectate so many various parts of the season itself. And so if you made it this far, again, I appreciate you. And until next time, peace and blessings. Big salute. Bye.